But anyway.
How did you end up opening your own store?
A friend of mine that was a salesman for a watch company called me and he said, this one store went bankrupt in San Francisco. Why don't you and I go in and bid on the store? I'll go in half with you and we'll start in with a retail jewelry store. So we were the high bidders in the court. It was a credit type operation. They really didn't do a heck of a lot, except he opened up like 20 stores and he went bankrupt because he opened up too many stores at one time. And so we were the high bidder in the court. The court assigned me the accounts receivables, which was like over $1 million, of which about 20% were collectible, but that paid the rent. So that was pretty good for like 4 or 5 years. And I started I figured if I'm going to be in business, I got to do something different than what all the other jewelers are doing. If I don't do something different, I'm just going to be another store that is existing. So I came out and I started in with my unusual things like the solid gold mousetraps, all the different things that you'll see on exhibit here. And it was amazing. After about, let's see, in 2002, I had a call from Jeff Post. Jeffrey Post is a curator of gems and minerals at the Smithsonian. I never met him, but he called me on the telephone from Palo Alto. He was accepting a mineral collection from David Packard, from the Hewlett-Packard Company, a very expensive mineral collection. He said, Sidney, he said, I've seen your things on television, I've seen them in newspapers, magazines. Is it possible to take a look at your items that you have while I'm in California? So I invited him to come down to see me, and I took him into the vault where I had my things stored. Shreve & Company is the oldest jewelry store in California, 165 years old. And part of the deal was when they bought me out, I had the jewelry store at the Fairmont Hotel for 40 years and another store downtown in San Francisco. And so anyway, he came down, I took him down to the silver vault, and he picked up, the first thing he picked up was a kaleidoscope. I think you probably have it here on exhibit. The kaleidoscope, he looked up everything you looked at in that kaleidoscope. It never showed the item twice, just one time, each time. It was fantastic. And then he looked at the Monopoly set, and he said, looked at that, he said, your things are absolutely fantastic. He says, they don't look like with what they did on television. I was on Johnny Carson's show every Christmas. I was on Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous with Robin Leach twice. Our magazine, you name it, I was on the show. Everyone wanted me on there because of my unusual things that I did. And so he looked up to me, he says, Sidney, I'd like to have you in the Smithsonian. I'd like to have you honored. At that point, I almost dropped dead because you can be a multi-billionaire. You cannot get into the Smithsonian. They honor one person each year out of 350 million people in the United States. So when they honored me, and they honored me in 2 places. One of the places was at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, because that's where I had the jewelry store at that time. And the next time they honored me in Washington, D.C. And when they honored me in Washington, D.C., they had me in the Harry Winston Gallery, where he gave that Hope Diamond. That was on permanent exhibit there. And I think it was the first time they ever had a sit-down steak dinner. And you met Meryl Fingerson. She was one of my people that's worked for me for many, many years. They sat Meryl right practically where the Hope Diamond was turning around in that Mosler turntable that they had there. And he says, I couldn't eat my dinner. He says, I was hypnotized with that stone. It was beautiful. And anyway, when Jeff called me up to the podium to say something, like you called me up and I can forget what I say, I froze. It's like winning an Oscar. I looked at him and everything, I started crying. Tears came from my eyes. I couldn't talk. I lost my.
That is a first for you.
That was you're right. That was something. When you can't talk, something had to happen. But anyway.
So it's wonderful, that Smithsonian accomplishment.
The Smithsonian, right.
But in reading your book and knowing a bit about you, you had so many clients over the years come in that store. I'm just going to list a couple, but Tony Bennett, Liberace, Jack Benny, Sammy Davis Jr., Dianne Feinstein, so many celebrities. Do you have any funny stories to tell us, or can you tell us about some of the celebrities that came through? And then also you were in some of the famous movies. Your jewelry was.
I did a couple of things for 2 movies. One was a Dudley Moore movie, and another one was Romancing the Stone with Michael Douglas. I did the emeralds for the movie. And it ended up, a lot of stories I can tell you, but some of the people that came in, it was funny. I don't know if you remember someone by the name of, what the heck's the comedian? Godfrey Cambridge. Remember Godfrey Cambridge? And he was in some movies also. He was a black entertainer. He was fantastic. My wife and I, when we first had our store, the jewelry store, he came in to buy a little cable car charm. How much is it? $35. Okay, great. Anyway, after telling him how fantastic he was, you're wonderful, we've seen you, and all the things that you've done. There's nobody that performs like you. That was wonderful. He was beaming all over. He says, is it okay to give you one of my credit cards, my check? Yeah, so I said, sure, go ahead, write a check. Wrote the check for $35. I came up and I looked at it and I said, by the way, do you have any identification? And he looked at me and he says, that's the funniest thing that ever happened. He says, would you mind if I use that in my act? That was one occasion. But I had several occasions very similar. One was Christy Hefner, from the Playboy Club. I made a few things for Playboy. And she invited me to Chicago and I stayed at the Playboy Club. And
how did Ronnie feel about that?
Well, Ronnie didn't care. That's my wife, Ronnie. Anyway, I went up to the top floor where they were, and I just designed a belt for myself, an SM in solid gold, 18 karat gold. I still have that belt. Maybe I should have had you show that thing here. But anyway, so as I walked into the room, she looked at me. She said, oh, hi, Sidney. How are you? She says, I want to ask you something. What does that stand for? Coming from San Francisco, I looked at her, I said, it doesn't stand for the thing that you're thinking of. S and M. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, so that was a funny thing.
So what about so people have had wild personalized requests. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us some of the craziest ones? I read about one in the book, but let's see if that's what you come up with.
A lady came in, she says, I had my gallstones removed. And she says, very painful. I would like to wear those as a remembrance around my neck. She says, can you design something? And I said, yeah, I can. So I went ahead and I designed I took her gallstones and I put them in acrylic. I embedded them in acrylic so they wouldn't deteriorate. And then I put a solid gold chain, thing that she wore. So that was a thing. Another thing that I made, one of my next door neighbors was a head orthopedic surgeon at Stanford Medical Center. And he said, Sidney, I know you do some fantastic things. I bought a little pin in Singapore, and we had it, but I really don't like it. They went ahead and they made the Palo Alto tree. That's the tree with a snake wrapped around the thing. That's their logo. And he says, could you do something that's really nice? He said, I know that you could probably do it. And I said, yeah. So he wrote me a letter. I said, write me a letter with what you want. He did. And I went ahead and made it. And what they did, the way I designed it, they use it for skin sensation testing. When someone breaks their leg or something, and they take the thing, they stick them with that little stick pin to see if they have any sensation. So that's something that I did for medical.
There you go.
Another medical thing was the stethoscope.
Right.
You have the stethoscope here. I was commissioned by Minnesota Mining Company, who owns their medical division. What's the name of it?
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Keep going.
But anyway, they have a medical division. Anyway, so when I proposed to them that I do my annual thing for them with the stethoscope, they sent me like a dozen stethoscopes to figure out which one that I wanted to use. I picked out the one that they sent me that I really liked. And on the stethoscope, as you see it on exhibit, I put a heart, pave diamonds. After all, they're examining you with your heart. You got to have something to go on with that heart. So it's really beautiful. And I made up two of them. I gave one to my wife's doctor. She had he was a head heart doctor at Mills Hospital in San Mateo, California. And I gave him one as a present, which he examined me recently with that particular stuff. When I came in his office, that's
I'm
what.
glad your heart's